Good evening. I'd like to call April 24th meeting of the Coventry Planning Commission to order at 6:30. I'd like to first call to order and have a determination of the quorum if the, how do we usually do that? That's second. Okay, I'll read the roll. Mr. Flynn? Here. Mr. Polselli? Here. Is Mr. Kenny? Here. Mr. Mattson? Here. Mr. Azankowski? Here. Mr. Anderson? Here. Ms. Lukowitz?
Here.
And the chair is here, so we have a quorum. I'd like to call everyone's attention to the fact that the emergency exits are in the rear of the room where you came in, and in the event those for some reason are blocked, we do have two doors behind us which will get you outside if you go through the town offices. With that, I'd like to rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First item on the agenda is the approval of minutes. 3.1 is the meeting of February 27th, and 3.2 is the March 23rd, 2019 site walk. I'll entertain a motion to accept one or both.
I'll make a motion. Accept both.
I second.
Any discussion?
I
Gary?
wasn't at the site walk, so I can't vote on that one.
Okay, do you want to take them separate then? Yeah.
I believe you can still approve the minutes. Yes. You don't have to be on the sidewalk.
Any further discussion? Aye. Next item, new business for discussion, preliminary plan, Camp Westwood Plat, Mai Tai Investments, Inc., proposed two-lot minor subdivision from one existing lot with one existing home, assessors plat 316, lot 117, in the RR3 zone at 11 Camp Westwood Road. Who is here for the applicant, please? Good evening.
Mr. Chairman. Thomas Cronin, 1070 Main Street, Coventry, for the applicant Mai Tai Investments, Inc. We're here for a preliminary on a minor subdivision on Camp Westwood Plat, 11 Camp Westwood Road. This is a lot that's at the corner of Route 117 and Camp Westwood Road, zoned RR3. After some additions, it's 6.84 acres, currently mostly wooded. There is an existing dwelling on the property. It's built in the 1700s. It's got a garage and shed as accessory dwellings. That house has a private well and on-site wastewater treatment system. The house is going to remain, and the accessory buildings as well. The proposal is to subdivide the lot into two parcels. Parcel 1 would be a new lot of about 3.19 acres, of which just under 2 acres are buildable. Be a new house built on parcel 1 with a private well and on-site wastewater treatment. That parcel 1 does have a wetland along the border of that property with a 50-foot perimeter, and the building envelope is outside of that perimeter. Where the existing house is become parcel 2, it'll be 3.66 acres, just over 2 acres of buildable, and as noted, the existing house will remain. Parcel 1 has about 487 feet of frontage on Camp Westwood Road. Parcel 2 has 275 on Camp Westwood Road and 860 or so on Flat River Road or Route 117. After the proposed subdivision, both lots meet all the zoning requirements for RR3, acreage, buildable area, frontage, front setback, side yard setback, rear yard setback. The DEM approvals have been secured, and we would ask to go to final administratively.
Okay, any questions from the board?
Lot number 2, setbacks, they don't meet the ordinance, but I guess that's always been, right, for that? It's a pre-existing non-conforming, pre-existing, yes.
Any other questions?
In the site walk, the site walk's in 2017, but there was a request from this board to have the entrance to parcel 1, the new house, be cut in an existing portion of the stone wall. It had a gap, and we've complied with that. That was more of a conversation, but we did listen to that and address it.
Okay. Oh, yeah. We have something in the packet here, I think, is it this one I have this for here? Camp Westwood approval application about, it makes no sense. Do we need to get a waiver? Does that have to be part of the motion on the soil erosion plan, or are we all set?
He will be asking for a waiver because on the checklist, one of the requirements is,
Yep.
as at the preliminary, you receive a soil erosion control permit.
Yep.
But he's going to be asking you to allow that until he gets his
He
building
didn't
permit.
ask, so I was asking. Yep,
Okay.
right.
Yeah, I apologize.
Yep, no,
Yes.
we're all set. Anyone else have any questions? With that, I will entertain a motion to approve. I believe we have some criteria contained in our packet, as well as, I'll just bring to your attention or reiterate that the applicant is asked to proceed to final administratively and also
Excuse me, Mr.
requested the
Chairman?
one waiver. Yes, sir.
I do have here, they just came in today, I was looking at the staff recommendation, and the staff recommendation states that they were to receive a letter from the fire district. That's one of this, I do have that letter. I'd like to just give you guys a chance to look at that letter now. Again, this just came in today, so that's why it wasn't in the packet.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Would anyone like to make a motion?
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion.
Okay.
I make a motion to approve the preliminary application for this minor subdivision at 11 Camp Westwood Road, AP 316, Lot 117, zoned RR3 for a proposed 2-lot subdivision on 6.85 acre parcel. The lot is consistent with the comprehensive plan, as the plan identifies the neighborhood as in central Coventry, where certain goals are met. This proposed subdivision supports these goals and is in conformance with the comprehensive plan. Zoning standards. The proposed development comports with the zoning ordinance. This area is rural, and the traffic impacts from a single-family house on this lot would be negligible. There's no real significant negative environmental impacts. The proposed subdivision, it received a RIDM determination letter from the freshwater wetlands stating that no permit was necessary. The applicant will be required to obtain OWTS, on-site wastewater treatment system from the RIDM, and a soil erosion permit from the town prior to issuance of the building permit. I'd like to add a stipulation that, nope, cancel that. There's no stipulation needed, I believe. Is that right? Okay. I'd like to add as a condition of approval, though, that no, we don't need that either, because we have it. Yep. I recommend that we approve the waiver allowing the owner to obtain a soil erosion sediment control permit prior to the issuance of a building permit. Mr. Chair, I'd also like to include this as a final administrative.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Here. Yes, sir.
I just want to clarify, so we, at the end, waived the need for the soil erosion and sedimentation control permit, but I believe in the significant, the environmental impact statement, we stated that it was required.
My recommendation was not to have it waived, it was to just make sure they required to get it prior to the issuance of a building permit. So they would still have to get that soil erosion permit, but just not at the preliminary stage.
And I think that's what Glenn said. That's what you said, right? Prior to a building permit?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Mr. Chair, if we
Yes,
can
sir.
add the staff's report also to the motion?
Would you like to amend your motion to incorporate the staff report into the approval?
Yes, I would like to amend the motion to incorporate the staff report into this approval.
And I will second that.
Any further discussion? Hearing none? All in favor? Aye. Any nays? Motion
Thank you.
passes. Yes, sir. Next item on the agenda, preliminary plan, Josh and Jenny Plat, Parker M. Driscoll and Robert M. Driscoll Living Trust, proposed two-lot minor subdivision from one existing lot, Assessors Plat 320, Lot 42.1 in the RR5 zone, located at 200 Potter Road. Is anybody here for the applicant? Good evening.
Samuel Sorsa with Coventry Survey Company, 46 South Main Street, Coventry. And I'm here for the applicant, Joshua Driscoll. So this is the preliminary submission for this two-lot, minor lot subdivision on Potter Road in Coventry. It is a proposed 5-acre parcel out of the existing
66.13.
66.13 acre parcel. We have wetlands on the site, so we submitted to DEM Wetlands. And we got the permit for the wetlands and for the on-site wastewater treatment system. And we would like to, we're requesting a waiver from checklist item 91 for the soil erosion and sediment control permit until submitting to the town for building permit. And then the second thing is we would like to go administratively to final. Guess that's it.
Yep. Okay, both of those points are raised in the staff report as well. Anyone on the board have a question, concerns?
I have one.
Yes, sir.
Staff, nothing from Weston on this, like the last applicant, you didn't receive anything?
Have you received anything from the Western Coventry Fire District?
No.
Okay. No. Thank you.
I just have one question. Now, on the remainder land, which is, well over 60 acres, did you have any concerns about that? I mean, you don't have to worry about future soil suitability. It's still developable, at least as one lot. You're not gonna, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I don't think there'll be any effects on that from this subdivision, from the new lot or the house. It still has more than enough frontage, and
Yeah.
And there's still access to the
Yeah.
rear. It's not like we're cutting off
No,
access.
no problem there.
Yeah,
Just
no, it's
wanted to make sure you weren't, taking out 5 acres and
No concern there. I don't think.
And there was a site walk in this a while back? Okay, my fault for not going. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to let you know one thing. I did speak with the tax assessor. I just wanted to let your client know that right now that 66 acres is in the Farm and Open Space Program. This 5-acre parcel you're cutting out will be taken out of that program. I just wanted you to be aware of that, so,
Right.
okay.
Do we
Thank
have to do anything about that, or no?
No, I was told that it would just be taken out, and it doesn't meet the requirements of the program anymore because it's only 5 acres in size.
What is the requirements? Because we had originally thought about going big enough to do that, and we just chose the minimum 5.
I don't have that answer for you. I mean, if you wanted to call the office, I could get it tomorrow, but I don't know. Okay.
Yeah, it might be 10, but I'm shooting from the hip.
I think you
And I believe once he records this, the taxes have to be paid in full for the last calendar year. That way they go clean with a new assessment going forward. So if you plan on recording this, I think that's,
could you say that one more
I
time?
think you have to pay the taxes in full for last year. The bill hasn't come out for this year before this gets filed. And if the new bill comes out, I think you have to pay it in full. Just, yeah, on the whole thing. I'm not
My father will take care of that. Then
Yep.
once this is in my name, then it's all my problem, tax-wise.
Okay. Any other questions or concerns? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion. I make a motion to approve the preliminary application for a minor subdivision at 200 Potter Road, AP 320, Lot 42.1, zoned RR5, proposed for a 2-lot subdivision on 66.13 acre farm. The proposed subdivision is supported by the comprehensive plan and the goals within that plan on objective 1.9, develop and implement a growth rate limitation program that's consistent with the town's capacity to accommodate new development and provide the services needed to support development to include schools, roads, police, fire protection, and recreation. The proposed subdivision also received permits from the Rhode Island DEM for an on-site wastewater treatment system and freshwater wetlands and significant alteration permit. Strict adherence to these guidelines set forth in these permits should ensure there will be no negative impacts on the environment. The proposed development also comports with the zoning ordinance. This area is rural and traffic impacts for this single-family lot should be negligible. I make a stipulation, Mr. Chair, that has a conditional approval of this preliminary plan application, that the applicant receive a letter from the Western Coventry Fire District before receiving final submission approval. I also asked that we grant a waiver allowing the owner to obtain a soil erosion sedimentation control permit prior to the issuance of the building permit. Mr. Chair, I also say we approve this as final administration.
Would you like to also incorporate the staff's
Mr. Chair, I'd like to also incorporate the staff's
report?
report in this motion.
I'll second that.
Second, any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Ayes have it, motion granted. Good luck.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Next item on the agenda. I have a habit of moving my agenda around, so bear with me. Discussion of the proposed subdivision regulations. You all have them. There's a number of articles and figures. Looks like Article 8, 9, proposed list of figures from 1 to 6, as well as, we'll hold off on 4.4 and 4.5. So I think we all got a packet, particularly this, the thicker of the two is the first one, and I know the comment was made earlier that, it was very difficult without the track changes, but as Mr. Wagner eloquently pointed out, had we left the track changes on, it would have been a very difficult document to read. So with that being said, perhaps we could just maybe have the staff highlight or point out maybe the the reasoning and some of the proposed changes just for that, no? Unless someone has questions.
I just wanted to point out that my comments were directed towards the changes towards the wind ordinance,
Okay.
The design and public state improvement standards, and the construction methods. That was developed by the town engineer, so
Yeah, basically, the Public Works Department and the town engineer, they had decided that these two sections, the design and public improvement standards, section 13 and 14, were antiquated. What they basically did is they went through and they took the standards, and they tried to make them conform with Rhode Island Department of Transportation standards. They're using the same type of asphalt standards, you know, and for the binder course now, they're calling for the hot mix asphalt, Rhode Island class 12.5. You know, they're just being more technical in what they're calling for and identifying it and trying to compare it to state standards, in addition to the curbing and the sidewalk as such. And one of the other things that they did was they took a look at those, the typical sections they had in the back. Those typical sections looked like they had been around since the late 70s. So they basically wanted to take a look at those and, again, put in the new, call them off with the new pavement types and the binder course, and just make sure they went along with today's design standards. Again, these are recommendations to you folks. You know, there might be some things you want to change. It's up to the commission to decide what they want to do with these. And again, they're not on for vote tonight. They're just here for discussion,
Right.
you guys to talk amongst yourselves if you have any questions, and to take a look at them, and we'll bring them back at a later date.
Okay, thank you for that. And I know, and just maybe, so is it safe to say basically what they were trying to do is tighten up the specifications so that they won't so broad and ambiguous that we could end up in a dispute with a developer over to, let's say, the type of asphalt that they used or the amount of asphalt that they put down for roadway versus this is really spells it right out for them?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions or concerns or items that they might want to discuss? I know as I thumb through this, I see some items in here that have come up in various applications, at least over my tenure on the board, but I would like to defer to others first. Anyone have any concerns, questions, items that they feel we might want to also address that haven't been addressed?
Since, my question on this is, we have some of these standards here, the new ones. If we did have what was old, are we able to look at the marked up version so that we could see what it was as compared to what it is?
I will talk to the Public Works Department. I'll get that and I'll distribute that to the board.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll highlight, you know, the proposed changes, so it's.
Just so we can see what it was and follow the
Absolutely, I
tracking
agree.
changes.
And again, these would just be recommendations, and it would be up to the town council to make the change, or these will actually be
No,
adapted?
these are incorporated, these are in the subdivision regulations, so therefore they fall under
They
your
fall
purview.
under us, good.
Right.
Okay. Well, one of the points that I mean, one of the observations that I have right out of the gate is I think almost every applicant that's come before us for a subdivision has asked for a waiver, especially in the R20 zone, of the 60-foot right-of-way width. And I think we've routinely looked at 50 feet as being applicable. Also, and again, without knowing exactly where it is, yeah, here it is here. We've got the cul-de-sac and the turnaround, which are on figures 7, is it? No, it says, talks about 7 and 8, but I have figure 6 with this, and that's as far as I go in my packet.
7 and 8 was the old numbers, there's only 6 figures proposed.
All right, so now this cul-de-sac shows the planter in the middle. Now, is that still what Public Works is preferring?
I also was surprised to see that it was my understanding that Public Works did not like those islands in the middle. They posed problems for plowing. And I know they've been asking us to remove that, so that's something some discussions we should have with them. In addition to, you talked about the 60-foot right-of-way in the R20 zone. I noticed on there that they had sidewalks on both sides of the street. Traditionally, the board has been favorable to putting sidewalks only on one side of the street. So maybe that could possibly allow for the a 50-foot right-of-way instead of the 60, if the board so choose.
Anyone? Yes, sir.
I would just state for information, I guess. The grassed middle of the cul-de-sacs, I think that was a recommendation for the past 20 years to alleviate and allow for infiltration and alleviate some of the impervious surface. So that's been standard, I would say, for quite some time now, to have grass swales and grassed or somehow some way for infiltration. I understand Public Works, and my dealings here, it's been difficult for them because of plowing purposes, but I'm not sure that I would be eager to waive or modify our regs to eliminate that opportunity, because that's sort of kind of standard rules, looking for more impervious surface area. So that's my 2 cents. I don't know what state regulations or planning has for recommendations, but I know just from my experience working in regulatory, it's been probably the last 15, 20 years. You would know better.
Were you at the last meeting we had?
I was there. I didn't like it, but I kept my mouth shut.
At the one at East Shore?
The one where we eliminated the grass circle in the middle.
Yeah, and he wasn't even that preliminary yet. We hadn't even scheduled the site walk. It was like the first time he showed the plan, and I didn't hear anyone else. I think Ron brought it up, and no one said anything. So, I mean, it's certainly, I'm familiar with this.
I could tell you why I didn't say anything. I mean, it's basically, sometimes you feel like you're fighting against the tide. So there's no point in me bringing it up if the board is already putting a form on, we don't like this, and it's difficult for
I
plowing,
respect
so-
your opinion, and honestly, when he did, this is the first I'm hearing, yeah.
I can tell you the reason why I brought it up is I sat behind the wheel of a plow truck, and it's very hard when
Yeah.
there's a grassed-in area in a cul-de-sac. So that was my impression.
Yeah. I'd like to hear from Public Works as well, especially if we end up with other considerations, because again, if we require sidewalks on one side and a swale on the other that addresses stormwater, that may almost balance itself out in some of these cases. By the same token, I'd also kind of like in the back of my mind to know how much this is saving developers on the subdivision, because if it's more profit in their pocket, I mean, the town
But wouldn't it be
sometimes.
safer for the children to
What,
have two
sidewalks?
sidewalks? Yeah, like, I'll give a for instance, Hopkins Hill School. There's sidewalks on one side, and the children have no sidewalks across the street, which I think is dangerous.
That's come up too before. And
The
it's-
last meeting.
Yeah, at the last, yeah, as a matter of fact, yeah.
Yeah.
They showed, I think, no sidewalks, and then we wanted them to add one, but as Mr.
I think
Crossman,
it's important.
as Mr. Crossman indicated when he was chairing the meeting, in his neighborhood, they have sidewalks on both sides and the people walk in the street.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Mind.
Because the tree roots and some of the other stuff, there's impediments sometimes to the sidewalk or the driveways with the up and down. The joggers don't like them, so. And it seemed, if you remember, and I don't know if you were on the board at the time, but we got a presentation on conservation-type developments where they were trying to say that it was better to have a swale on one side to let the water run off and, protect that, as opposed to, because what happens is the more impervious soil that you have, that's more water that you have to deal with, and there seems to be a big push in terms of I guess it would call stormwater maintenance. Is that what you would call it?
Yeah,
Management.
watershed protection. I mean, you want to kind of eliminate point source flow, and allow for infiltration is better. So, I mean, having an entire area of asphalt and then having to redirect that all into a basin, then pointing it right in a direction is not the ideal. Related to sidewalks, I guess I would state, so we did discuss that at the last meeting because of a project, or 2 meetings ago, I can't remember. I would leave that on the table because it's really site-specific. I think in Mr. Crossman's neighborhood and a lot of these neighborhoods, it's perfectly safe to have one sidewalk. And you can have people walking in the street, but it doesn't necessarily equate to the rest of the town. There's probably
Through
busy
street.
areas that if it's a through street, you don't necessarily, and it's heavily traveled, you don't want kids crossing the road to get to a sidewalk, So I do agree, like in a lot of locations, like where we were talking about last time near Tyoke Lake, at Tyoke School, it's probably unnecessary unless it becomes heavily traveled, and that has potential because it's going to wrap around all that traffic now by the school block. Anyway, things to consider in that, at least without having modifications to regulations, we could always waive those opportunities, or to provide opportunity for a waiver, versus you eliminate it and then you don't have really an option to require it if necessary. So.
That's a good point.
Mr. Clooney, I just wanted to bring up Section 13 on street trees. You know, you brought up the fact that the roots, you know, tend to rip up the sidewalks. I do know that the Public Works and the Engineering Department worked very hard on selecting new tree species where they have tap roots as opposed to spreading roots that would rip up the sidewalks. So they did try to take that into consideration.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, I know at least the street behind me, it's Partridge, I think it is, and the trees grew, but the branches grow out, so you can't walk on the sidewalk without hitting your head. So, again, it varies depending on what you want. I guess you can't have everything.
Yeah, again, that's kind of knowledge and education through time. You go through the cities, Norway maple is everywhere. Well, Norway maple is shallow roots, so sidewalks and everything's ripped up.
Okay,
Anyway, I agree with the earlier comment of in order to be able to adequately review these, having them done annotatedly or track changes, it really makes it a lot more user-friendly than trying to go back to compare where it changed.
I'll email that out to the board, those track
Thank you.
changes.
Thank you, Mr. Crossman. And then maybe if you could just verify with the town engineering department what their concerns, that we've basically, you know, what we were kind of talking about, and if they say, no, we'd rather have the ladder, we don't mind the cul-de-sacs that way, we know you can always grant the waiver, but there are instances where maybe that's preferred. I haven't driven a plow truck, so, okay, any more discussion on this particular item? And then we're gonna just bring this back again for a recommendation. Do you think it'll be as soon as next month? We'll get the stuff, no, not next month, okay.
I'm expecting a large agenda next month, so I was gonna maybe just put it off till June. It all depends.
Okay, next one, discussion of proposed amendments to Article 20, wind energy facilities. Discussion on future proposed amendments to the town council regarding Article 20 of the Town of Coventry zoning ordinance related to wind energy facilities. And everybody got that in their packet as well.
So, this was something that was initiated in response to, if anybody's not familiar with it, we issued a violation against our wind turbines for causing shadow flicker on an abutting lot. And in going through that process, we realized that we really didn't have any regulatory control over those turbines other than some rather limited language in the special use permits that approve them. So we went back, not only looking at the flicker issue, but looking at the noise complaints that we regularly get about the turbines as well. Started looking at what other areas of the world do in terms of regulating the negative impacts of these kinds of structures. And over time, the changes just progressed and progressed and progressed. The biggest addition to the changes that you have here are operational standards. I took the regulations that we had and tried to divide them into siting and construction standards that would apply to brand new proposals and operational standards that would apply to everything. The operational standards came from researching countries in Northern Europe that have a lot of experience with these things and looking at the standards that they use, looking at recommended standards from places like the World Health Organization and other large entities that have dealt with the negative ramifications of these, and trying to come up with some standards that we will actually be able to apply to control some of these negative ramifications going forward that will have a little bit more bite to them than the special use permits do. So that's a general overview. I did not provide a track changes version simply because by the time I got to the end, if I had left the track changes in, it would be very difficult to read. What I think I can do is I could go back and highlight, use some yellow highlighting to draw your attention to stuff that is new, and leave the stuff that was there already without any highlighting on it, and at least that way draw your attention to stuff that you should be focusing on. But we can provide that later.
Mr. Chairman.
Any
Yes, sir.
questions?
I have one comment. I mean, we have 10 wind turbines in Coventry that never came in front of this board. And I didn't know what flickering was until I saw a video of it. And it is really unsettling, I think, to live in an area where that's happening because it goes dark, light, dark, light. I mean, I wouldn't want that to be happening in my yard. I didn't know what flickering was because it never came in front of us. It was something that never was talked about. And people don't understand that. We had no knowledge of those as far as the planning aspect for those 10 to go up in town.
Well, unfortunately, I can't offer an explanation as to why those didn't come in front of the planning
I
commission.
don't think we had any regulations at the time. I don't know if we even had an ordinance, did we?
Arguably, those were major land development projects that should have come in front of the planning
But
commission.
I
Why they didn't,
I didn't
have
know
no
anything
idea.
about the concerns of the residents as far as flickering. I had to really research it.
Yeah. So, yeah, shadow flickering is that, it's like a strobe light effect. And if you're referring to the videos from Mr. Sullivan's property, which was the property impacted by the notice of violation we issued, I just want to make it clear that what most regulations recognize as flicker is the changes of light inside a building, not shadows on trees or yards or anything outside. In the proposals that I gave you, we did extend a little bit. I did find some areas that were regulating flicker outdoors in the immediate vicinity of the house, and what they would refer to them as outdoor living areas. So in the immediate vicinity of a house, a deck, a patio, a recreation area, whatnot, will create a little bit of a ring around a house to keep that free of shadows as well. But in terms of, big yards, and I've seen the videos from Mr. Sullivan's property, and yeah, on a bright sunny afternoon, it's very distracting, the shadows just going across the treetops in his backyard. Unfortunately, I don't think that's anything that we're going to be able to do anything about.
There's no way that we can force them to take it down? I mean,
Your solicitor might
happening-
want to comment on that.
well, something has to be done. Those people out there, it's not fair to them.
I think you're right to recognize the problem. However, there really is no way to take those down without committing what's called a condemnation or a taking. So in theory, and again, I'm only speaking theoretically, in theory, if the town decided that it wanted to exercise its power, you would be paying a very costly price, because you'd essentially have to take the land that the device sits on, as well as the device itself, along with the likely value of their respective power purchasing plans for the next 25 or 30 years. So it in a practical sense, I can't imagine any municipality that would do that. As Mr. Flynn has mentioned, as Mr. Wagner has mentioned, there have been a lot of concerns with citing these things. In fact, there have been some communities out on the Cape that installed them, and then eventually decommissioned them themselves because of the environmental concerns and whatnot. But I don't think it's realistic to expect that the town would take these properties and the wind turbines down. It just would be cost prohibitive.
Okay, if someone wanted to bring in the turbines, would they now have to come before us?
You're asking, I think, on a new application?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
And if these are adapted, then they'll have to comply with these. Now, just to follow up on that, the early one subdivision regulations, those stay with the board. This requires council approval because it's a zoning change? That's
Correct.
correct. So this would just be
A recommendation.
a recommendation. And is it your position, or is it the town's position at this point, that once these gets adapted and advertised, adopted and advertised, they would, the operational aspects would then be retroactive to the ones that already exist? Or is that not clearly decided yet?
That's clearly spelled out, and again, I think Dave will confirm, you can regulate operations without affecting a condemnation, so long as it's reasonable. If, for example, if you tried to impose a noise limitation that prevented them from operating, then you'd be wandering into what the solicitor just described as a condemnation. But if you impose a reasonable noise limitation that maybe just makes them shut down during, high wind periods when they're generating a lot of noise, and they are still able to operate and make money, then that's a reasonable exercise of the town's regulatory authority.
Yeah, these proposed regulations would give the town the ability to cite these existing turbines if they exceeded the standards set forth. But the standard, you can't be so onerous that it is in effect a taking. So reasonable standards for operation is within the town's legal authority to do. It's constitutionally valid, but you can't have a standard that is so stringent that it's impossible to meet. That's when you reach into constitutional problems.
And I would wonder what that line is, because if you were to, for example, restrict the operational because of the noise to a level where it really cut into their income stream versus marginally cutting into their income stream, I mean, who's going to decide that? And that's kind of a rhetorical question at this point. And then my follow-up is, do we have any of these turbines now that once these pass, the flicker actually does affect the living space or the immediate outdoor patio space? Is there anyone that's going to come forward and say, hey, my turbine's been there now for all this time, and the flicker doesn't just stay with the yard. It's close enough that at certain times of the day, given the sunlight, it is impacting, let's say, the windows to the rear of the house, the deck, or have we not looked at that? I'm just
Well,
curious.
as part of the violation case that we did, we contracted with an outside consultant to do some computer modeling. Mr. Sullivan's house was the only house that tripped. There was a 30-hour cap per year in the special use permit. His house was the only one, based on the computer modeling, that exceeded that threshold. There were a couple of other houses that were high, but none like his. The standards that we're implementing here, however, would require some relief for some other properties that are out there, but that right now there are not a lot of properties out there that are getting this flicker in the house. We have a lot of people comment that they don't like the shadows on their lawns during the afternoon. But like I said, in all likelihood, that's not something we're going to be able to help with. I also have somebody who's complained about being bothered by the red aviation lights on top of them. I can guarantee there's not going to be anything I'm going to be able to do about that. So, you know, we're trying to do what we can to address the problems.
Well, the reason I brought it up is for exactly the reason I think we were just discussing. If it passes and then we try to enforce it, and some property owners come in and say, hey, you guys just passed this, and guess what? His flicker's in my house. And then the town tries to enforce it, and then next thing you know, we've got some form of an inverse condemnation, and now we've got to pay the damage. That's what I mean, wouldn't it behoove us to have the modeling study done for the existing turbines now to make sure that there's no claims? Or if there are going to be some potential claims, to just address them in the ordinance rather than pass it and then deal with it after the
Well,
fact?
I mean, the owner of the turbines will have the ability to be heard on the adoption of the ordinance. If he believes that it's going to impact his business, he can be heard at council, and if they pass it and he disagrees with it, he can appeal the ordinance to the Superior Court. And if it comes up during an enforcement matter, we'll have to deal with it then. So far as I'm concerned, the standards that I'm looking to impose in the ordinance are reasonable
I agree.
and well supported by scientific evidence that's already out there. I'm not trying to cut new ground by any extent of the imagination.
And I wasn't suggesting that. I just wanted to make sure that was the best defense we had, was to let the applicant basically bear the responsibility as opposed to waiting until a homeowner filed a suit and then put the town in the box to defend itself. That's what I was worried about.
I think as a practical matter, it would be difficult just difficult in the sense of just unwieldy to go and actually have studies done. It would also be costly, have studies done to test whether or not any of these standards are triggering, are going to trigger something before the ordinance is updated. Because it's certainly possible that there are individuals out there who might be experiencing shadow flicker, for example, that aren't concerned about it. And so I think that, what you're saying makes a lot of sense, and it certainly appears to be very prophylactic against warding off legal action. But, in point of fact, even though our proposal, the recommendation is very reasonable, we could come across a developer who still wants to test the boundaries of that reasonableness in court, whether there were studies done or not. So, that's still possible, but.
I wasn't as worried about the developer as the homeowners coming forward. I guess what I'm getting at is, has the town at least looked at the distance between the existing wind turbines and the potential for flicker inside dwellings in the area before they pass this? And
We have a study that we paid for that's very comprehensive in trying to predict what the contractor projected as reasonable case flicker. So they took GPS coordinates for every structure, and they can analyze that relative to the position of the sun and the wind turbines at any given point in time, and then they factor in typical sunlight conditions, so you don't have flicker on a cloudy day. How many days of sunshine do you normally get? And wind direction, because you won't have flicker on a property if the wind isn't from the right direction to face the blades correctly. So they take all of that into account in trying to determine whether or not a structure will experience flicker. And it's actually going to be conservative, because when they run the model, they consider the structure as a greenhouse. So all sides are glass.
So based on that, you're confident the risk is low?
I'm confident the risk is low, but I think if we were to design an ordinance around the idea of whether or not it would impact anybody, why would you?
Oh,
then
I wasn't
do an
suggesting
ordinance?
that. I was just concerned that if we had to grandfather any aspects of it in now before this passed, as opposed to the opposite. That's what I was, and just one final follow-up. Now, if someone has a large tract and a developer comes in now and wants to construct dwellings, And those dwellings, unbeknownst to the potential buyers, even although they see the wind turbine, are now going to be affected by flicker in conflict with the ordinance. How does that work? Or do we have to deal with that when the subdivisions come before us?
Well, I think I tried to deal with that in the proposed ordinance insofar as any new construction of these
Right.
things.
Yeah, I saw that.
That I think, I tried to put in there that the developer would need to consider possible future development around the wind turbine, considering that most of these things are going in residential districts. But insofar as the existing turbines go, if somebody were to come in and put houses in within the flicker radius of those, that's coming to the nuisance. I mean, that's on the shoulders of the person building the house.
Oh, I know.
So,
Yeah, to my comment, because, winter months are much different than summer months, and the way this carries. So you commented that it's in a square glass box, greenhouse effect, so, there is a difference in, winter months and summer months in the affected area, the trees themselves.
yeah.
And if, Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yep, sure.
Reference counsel, Mrs. Lukowitz, brought up the point, only because it was already under discussion. Because a lot of people I know that feel that way, Don Quixotes, right? Let's take them down. You made it clear how difficult it would be. I don't know if there's been a precedent set in the town ever on anything that was built, I'm not good with words, I don't want to say fraudulently, didn't go through the proper channel. I think everyone's under the impression that it was not, something went down that was not right, and yet people are just accepting it as is. And I just want to prevent that in the future. It seems like we are going in that direction, but anything in the past, I don't know if it's possible to go back and revisit it. That's all I want to say.
Yeah, it's to answer the question, it's a complicated answer, but the short answer is that essentially, if there was something that was constructed, if it is not currently violating our subdivision regs or zoning ordinances, then it is very difficult to curb that. And let me go on to say that if there is a property use out there, and this is really more of a zoning issue, but if there's a property use out there that is violating the zoning ordinance, the only way to stop that is to bring legal action to essentially, the term is to abate the zoning violation. And again, those are, then they get kind of messy. I understand what has been said about the curiosity or perhaps fraudulent nature concerning these wind turbines. Unfortunately, there's really not a lot that can be done to go into the past, because as a practical matter, anybody who did construct a turbine, even if they did not go through the proper channels, it would have been up to somebody at the municipal level at that time to sort of call out, I can't just decide I'm going to go build a house on a piece of property in Coventry without a building permit. At some point in time, someone's going to say, hey, is that did you get a septic system? Did you get a building permit, foundation permit? And so these things certainly went up. We know they did not go through a planning process. They certainly, and I think I agree with Mr. Wagner, there's no question that they probably should have. I don't have any explanation really as to why it didn't happen, but they're in place now, and it's hard to unwind or unring that bell.
Thank you.
Is, one more question, Mr. Chairman. Is the town benefiting from these turbines and solar panels?
I think the answer to that is yes, and I could be wrong, but I think that I think that there may be a benefit to the town through energy purchase agreements whereby the town may be purchasing energy at a reduced rate, given the fact that the turbines are there. But I don't know that to be true, and it may not be true. I will answer a philosophical question too, because some people say that the turbines and the solar farms or solar arrays, they're only in place because of significant grants or significant tax credit offsets. So in a philosophical discussion of taxation, we all probably pay for it. And we pay for it when we pay our electric bill, because there's surcharges on there to fund these, environmentally friendly energy producing things. But I don't know if the town is specifically benefiting, but I think they might be with some power purchase agreements.
Yes, sir.
I would just speak to that. First, stating that when that's come up in the past, we've been told, the board's been told, we are not receiving any benefit from the turbines specifically. So I'm not sure where that lies. And you mentioned you're not positive, so I'm not putting that. I'm just stating it.
Yeah, that may be accurate. I don't know.
I think going back a little bit, and then I'll go forward. The idea of shutting down turbines during high wind, we will get lots of pushback, because unlike solar, which generates electricity linearly, where you can't produce more, wind is exponential. The faster the wind, the more energy you're producing, it banks into the grid. So I think developers would really push against that. Flicker, I haven't been involved in Flicker in 10, 15 years of reading up on it. It's definitely become a significant human health related issue. And one thing moving forward we could consider, this is brainstorming, is limit the flicker to on-site, just as limit water runoff to on-site. You can't have an impact on an adjacent property. You could think about that in the future. And then I would just say for Mr. Wagner, really, I applaud you on keeping up on these things. I think with solar and wind, they're very new. Our state's at the cutting edge of at least offshore wind. You're getting hammered with solar, and I think we have to be bold and trying to stay ahead and set regulations that might be a little bit more limiting, and then ratchet back, then get what we've gotten, which is basically wind turbines and solar, popping up all over the place. So it's all new, it's all coming quick, and towns are getting hit, and we're one of the leading ones getting hit right now. So I guess that's probably all my comments, other than something I can get back to you regarding specifics within here.
I'm going to echo what he said. I went through this pretty well. I could actually probably make a different sheet for you, but I won't. I appreciate some of the literature in here, with Kay. It's a real case, it's almost a human factor taken into consideration. There's a lot of different terminology in here. And I know we're just discussing this. I'm not gonna act on it or approve it. I don't know when that's gonna happen. I don't know if we're gonna have much input before that happens. I think we ought to, because if we look at this and compare it to the old one, and now this discussion that we had, I don't know if there's any minimal standards set up. I don't know if can only have so many megawatts in a given area, or I don't know. How can you put up 30, wind turbines on this side of the street? Well, no, you can only have 10 because the megawatt wise or whatever the case may be. There's no real minimum standard, I don't think, in this ordinance. And I don't know if you can put it.
That's wading into areas that I'm not really technically competent to speak on. I do know that when you start talking about wind turbines, you got to set them up in a certain way, because you'll create vortice shadows and whatnot behind the wind turbines that will affect the next wind turbine. And
correct. And also the line that they produce can only take so much, but they can just run another line. And
correct.
I don't know where that stops. I just think, I don't know if there has to be goals or.
I understand where you're coming from, and I've often thought to myself whether there is a logical or reasonable way to say we've got enough. I have not answered in my own mind how you do that. You know, whether you say, you know, a certain number of turbines within a certain area is enough, or a certain number of megawatts generated is enough. I'm certainly willing to listen to anybody who's got ideas on those subject matters, because I haven't been able to find
The
answer.
conflict and severability, you know, my question is, and I'm learning, look, if there's a conflict between, you know, provision of this ordinance or any other provision, Coventry code, zoning, or subdivision ordinances, the provision of this ordinance shall apply. So I guess, if there's a conflict, like, does that include the comprehensive plan? I don't know what that is. Is that a Coventry code? You know, I don't know if that's.
No,
You know?
and if I need to clean that up, I can. But that's intended to refer to other ordinances within the Coventry Code of Ordinances.
Because we had a couple instances where we put up the comprehensive plan against ordinances, and I think the comprehensive plan was seen as the hierarchy, you know? So it's, you know, we stayed here. If it's put up against anything, the ordinance shall apply. So that's all.
No, I mean, ordinances are required to be adopted in consideration of the comprehensive plan.
Yep.
So if you think of the comprehensive plan as a constitution,
Yeah.
it has to follow the guidelines set forth in the comprehensive plan. Just like Congress passing a statute has to abide by the provisions of the Constitution.
I think with regard to where the line's drawn or not enough, I mean, this isn't low-income housing where there's a mandate. I think this is our town, and we should be deciding that as a town what we want, and that could happen through the comp plan. And I'm not sure what's out there. I know one of my staff looked at Little Compton's solar ordinance recently and thought that was kind of at the forefront of, it's a newer ordinance, and so I think everybody's trying to catch up, learn, and figure out what they want to allow, including the state. I mean, the governor has a goal of 10% renewable by, I think, 2020. I think we're at 3%. The offshore developments will bring us up to like something like 7%. But there is a evolution and change after seeing so much forested land cut to put up solar panels, where there are now incentives for brownfield sites and more urban locations. So I think, again, like, it's coming quick and everybody's trying to keep up, but we should try to continue to push to stay ahead. And
I've been working with there's been a stakeholders group meeting on the solar issue for the last couple of years. There is legislation that's been put forth this session, and what we've spent a lot of time doing is to try and mitigate the financial enticements that have been put out there to develop these sites, particularly the solar sites, where those enticements haven't discriminated between where the facilities are located, which means the developers look for the cheapest land to take the best advantage of the enticements that they can. And that cheap land are the green forested areas on the western side of the state. We spent a lot of time in the last 2 years talking about how we need to not offer financial incentives to people to be cutting down all those trees, and instead offer the financial incentives to put the solar on developed sites like parking lots or sites with historic environmental issues like brownfields. And I hope that that's where the legislation winds up getting us, but who knows what comes out the sausage grinder at the end of the legislative session.
Mr. Flynn?
I think I was gonna mimic what the solicitor said, that the state is so proactive with this, that they're almost pushing the developers into doing it. with
That's
the
exactly
incentive
what they
program.
did.
So the state is working against the town.
Yeah.
Or the towns and municipalities, because they're giving these incentives, and these developers are going around calling these big landowners, like the Paglarinis on Hope Road, and giving them offers they just can't refuse. So the state is so proactive, how do you fight that? Unless you put legislation through to stop it.
And that's the only way to do it, because there were two things that were driving this. One of them, like I said, was the state financial incentives to build it. The other thing was the creation of the concept of virtual net metering, so that a business in Warwick who didn't have room for solar could build 50 acres of solar in Coventry and take all the energy from it through a virtual metering agreement. So they could displace all of their energy demands someplace else. So between the two of those things going on at the same time, Coventry, West Greenwich, Richmond, Exeter, Situate, we're all facing the same issue right now.
And also, if I can add, Brown University is actually, he's got a plan going forward to put so much percentage of their energy to renewable. They're buying wind farms and solar farms in other states and buying that electricity from that.
Yep.
So it's just not state, it's federal too, that's pushing this. So they're creating wind turbines and solar fields in other states, not even in Rhode Island, that Brown is buying the power from, and they're funding it.
Mr. Kenny.
Some of those locations may be more appropriate for that kind of development. The limited forested areas that we still have in the Northeast, we need to take steps to try and protect that. So,
I'm not defending or advocating for wind turbines or solar farms, but the federal government mandated that all the states will be at so much % renewable energy by a certain time frame. And I can't remember the date and what the percentages are. So that'll give you an answer why the governors are pushing to get this stuff, so they can get in mandate with the federal government and be compliant, so it doesn't affect any funds coming from the federal government. I think we just need, as a town, we just need to be a little smarter on how we approve and look at things, and this is a great step in that, in going forward with that. I mean, renewable energy is here. We just need to be able to control where it goes in our town, and that it, with the less impact to our citizens of the town.
Anyone else have anything? Just one more question. This is more for the solicitor. I know there was one particular homeowner that I was listening to. I know we had that last solar farm that we approved, the small one that was going to the zoning board. But was there a decision in another community that rendered these manufacturing as opposed to agricultural or farming use?
I'm honestly not aware of that. I can check that and get back to you.
I actually think I can answer that. There was a case involving the wind turbine in North Kingstown, right next to the Home Depot off of Route 1. North Kingstown tried to tax that turbine under property taxes. It was challenged. It went all the way up to the Supreme Court on the basis that there's an exemption in the tax code for manufacturing equipment. And the turbine owner argued that it was manufacturing equipment because it was taking a raw material, wind, and converting it into a product, electricity. And the Supreme Court agreed with that rationale and found that the turbine was manufacturing equipment and therefore exempt from local taxation. Now, the legislature has since changed that statute to allow municipalities to tax those things at a certain rate. Our turbines predate that legislative change, so they're not directly.
I
affected by
asked
it.
because there was an appeal, I believe, on a solar farm installation where a municipality,
So,
homeowners challenged it as this is not in compliance with the comprehensive plan because it's not an agricultural use, it's manufacturing. And manufacturing was not allowed in that zone. That, I'm just throwing it out there because I don't know if it's true or it's not true.
there's an argument to be made that a solar farm is the same thing as wind. You're just using sunlight as your raw product to create electricity.
And if
So-
that's the case, it would perhaps be in conflict with some portion, but then again, if this ordinance superseded it, and again, it was just something to throw out there. I don't know where it went with our zoning board. I know the person indicated, at least through social media, that was going to be the argument that was raised. I don't know where it went or whether it was raised at the last zoning board meeting, if it was the one that was going to be held at the annex, I think at the beginning of April. I don't know if it came up or it didn't, but I was just curious.
I think also there's an element of this, it's not quite apples to apples, but there's an element of this that goes into local zoning regulations. For example, I can tell you in a neighboring community, both large solar and large wind turbines have been viewed as power generating stations under that community's local ordinance. And so power generating stations are limited to only certain zoning districts. And at least under that concept or that zoning plan, that's one way to limit these type of things. Again, it's in another community under a different zoning structure, but there are considerations as to, for example, a power generating station may only be allowed in a BG zone or a manufacturing zone or an industrial zone, for example. That's not to say that a passive solar array is the same thing as a coal-burning power plant. But
No, I understand. I was just trying to find a way that we just want to make sure everything's matches going forward.
Sure.
Because I similarly had the concerns about the deforestation, although I think there's arguments to be made on the other side for those farmers that have been out there and they have cleared land that need to supplement their income because farming is no longer profitable or they're just not physically able to do it. So that said, anybody else have any other discussion points on this? We have one more to follow. Okay, and that is just this, I believe it's the notice, discussion amendments to Article 4, notification radius for discussion on future proposed amendments to the town council regarding Article 4, Section 423 of the town zoning ordinance related to the abutters notification. I think we got a handout on this one. This does have the strikeouts, and it looks like what the ordinance does, or what the proposal does, is eliminate all the notifications for 1,000 feet or 2,000 feet in the rural zones, and then bumps them up. As you can see, rural residential 2 goes down to 200 feet from 1,000 feet, and rural residential 3 and rural residential 5 go down from 1,000 feet and 2,000 feet respectively down to 500 feet. And it also then moves up some of these village, I forget what VRC, VMC, GB, and all those up to 200 feet. You all have it in front of you. It's 1 foot. So I don't know if anyone has any discussion on that.
So I can do a little introduction on this. This portion of the zoning ordinance was changed not that long ago. Originally, it was a simple 200-foot radius for everything. We had one of our former council members complain that not enough people were receiving notice of the solar projects out in the western end because this radius was not big enough. So we changed from the straight 200 feet and added the 500, 1,000, and 2,000 feet radiuses. It got approved, and then we started getting zoning applications in where people were literally having $1,500 bills for their certified mailings for relatively simple zoning variances. And it was just having ridiculous impacts on members of the community trying to do relatively simple things with their property. And we felt there was a need to throttle back on that a bit. So we're eliminating the super large radiuses. You know, the idea here is to notify the people who are impacted by the projects 500 feet from the borders of a property should be more than enough to identify those people who are in the zone where they're going to be impacted. In terms of something like wind, where you have something 400 feet high that's going to throw impacts much farther beyond the property boundaries, we can set bigger distances, which I did in the wind ordinance. But for most of these projects, 500 feet is more than enough to notify these people. So certainly your input is welcome, but I was having a real problem standing at the counter telling somebody who wants to add a little bedroom off the side of their house that they have to spend $1,500 or more on certified mailings. It was a real burden.
You could argue that, but the RR5, $1,500 in mailing, the RR5, truthfully, 2,000 feet could only be, 12 homes. When you consider the 2 5-acre lots and everything else. The problem, my concern is we don't have ordinance for, I don't know, a dog park, right? Or, I don't know, a mechanic shop, anything else that might affect people, you're only talking like maybe 2 or 3 neighbors at the 500 foot. At the 500 foot range.
I want to chime in on that, but before I do, I have one other question. When we do our public hearings, do our mailings mirror this, or are they the same or more? Like, in other words, for a major subdivision, is it 200 feet
200
all
feet.
around? All around. We don't even
200
go to
feet
the
all around.
500.
Yeah.
Okay. And Mr. Anderson, I think maybe I could lend itself, and I'll let anyone else chime in, either from the board or whatever. But remember, when someone goes for a zoning ordinance, they have to demonstrate, first of all, there's a hardship. Why are they asking to deviate from what the required zoning ordinance is? And 2, is what I'm doing with my property going to have an adverse effect on your property value? It's not to notify people that may or may not want that particular operation in town. It's how is it directly going to affect the value of my property? So once you go beyond 500 feet, granted the density is more in the West End, but is it really going to devalue someone's property that's a 1/10 of a mile away? So that was the intent. It doesn't mean they can't look in the newspaper, see the public hearing notice, link up with the Secretary of State's office to read the agenda. They're just not going to get the official certified mail notice, so they have an opportunity, or they may otherwise miss an opportunity to come in and say, sir, if he puts that addition there, it's going to be so close to my property, I'm going to suffer an adverse effect. So regardless if it's already allowed in that zone, I mean, I think we'd be hard pressed to say that the activity is going to adversely affect someone's property who's beyond 500 feet. And as Mr. Wagner indicated, something like the renewable energy or the wind, they've actually addressed with a special provision that makes it further away, where it's a major change to a much larger area as opposed to. I mean, that's just my thought on that, because I feel for someone that has to get a sideline setback variance because they have wetlands in one corner of their property and they got to notify people that far away.
And you are notifying all your abutters. So those are the ones I think that are most
And then
interested
some,
and
500,
impacted.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah, because.
I mean, in an R20, you're gonna, with 200
Remember,
feet,
the
you're gonna-
distance is measured from the property boundary. It's not measured
Right.
from the location where the work is happening. So if you have a 10-acre or 20-acre plot of land in RR5, you're measuring your 500 feet from the edges of that 10-acre property. So you really are reaching out quite a distance.
Yeah, I can see the other point, though. 500 feet, if you got 2 60-acre parcels on either side, if it's what do they got, six people they got to notify.
And maybe you only do notify a couple of lots, but you're still that far away from what's happening.
Right. Goes to the point that I spoke before. Plus, there's still an advertisement in the newspaper, and the agenda is available, and you can actually subscribe to the agendas now and just have them emailed to you automatically by the Secretary of State's office. So
Right.
there's plenty of opportunities out there for people to find out what's going on in their community or in their immediate neighborhood, not to mention social media. I thought maybe it was because we didn't have venues big enough. You start sending out notices a half mile away, you get 4,000 people showing up. Might as well notify the whole town, somebody wants to put something up that we're opposed to. So I think that was the expectation, but does anyone have anything else to add to this on the distances? Yes?
Thanks for the explanation, because, yeah, I can understand why we were changing it. It was good to hear that it had been 200 feet. I'm okay with this, but you brought up the wind turbines. What is it for wind turbines? I can't find it.
It's handled a little bit differently with the wind turbines in that if you're looking to build a new wind turbine, you are required to establish a notification area around the wind turbine based on the size of the turbine. So it's actually 10 rotor diameters around the turbine, which is a standard area that I found.
But our notice radius?
Right. And the notice radius, so what I set up was, okay, we're gonna create this study area around the turbine, and then that would become your notification radius as well.
I thought I saw something in here from the turbine. I think I was looking at the wrong thing, but I still kind of wonder, so I appreciate the explanation. I still wonder if we should be having an abutter radius from the property boundary, not the turbine necessarily itself, because you could be whatever distance, X distance from the turbine, but maybe it's okay.
Is
I don't wanna bring us back to
does
turbine.
that calculate the radius and then you go from the property line, or are you measuring from the turbine?
I'm measuring from the turbine.
Okay.
You may not have to notify anybody if it's not off property, if it doesn't extend beyond your property.
If you're dealing with a 400-foot turbine, you're looking at least a half a mile radius around the turbine.
All right.
So where the turbines are now, the neighbors were notified?
No, back then it was,
They should have been under the special use requirements, yeah, the immediately abutting property owners all would have been notified for the zoning board, yes.
I think we would have heard from them.
we don't know what happened back then. That's
Right.
really the
Yeah.
question.
Can only
We
move
just
forward.
don't know, so.
No.
It went through zoning for special use permits, it did go through zoning. I have the special use permits, I know it went through zoning.
Anyway, I didn't mean to bring us back to wind turbines. We moved. This is good.
And again, the reason it's here is for your input. If you see things that aren't clear, that you think need explanation, if you think the radiuses need to be changed, I mean, that's why it's being brought to you. I lived with the wind turbine stuff for so long that things may seem clear to me that aren't clear to you. It needs to be clear to the person reading this for the first time, which is the element that you guys can bring to this at this point.
Well, you did a good job explaining it.
Okay, so hearing nothing else, I guess we'll reread those, and when it comes up the next time, it'd be helpful, I think, if everyone's prepared to either have their comments or, not to be going over it again at the meeting. I think they'd like to see us take some action so we don't have to get into a third meeting. That being said, no more business before us. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I second.
Yeah.
Motion by Mr. Mattson, seconded by Ms. Lukowitz. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
Thank you.
Fire department.